Hey, everybody. So, how many of you were able to go to Fields of Faith last night? So, it was really awesome. We actually had several of our students who had the opportunity to go and be a part of that and share. It was just really good. And that's kind of what we've been talking about over these past several weeks is just what it looks like to share our story with others. Talk about what it looks like to share the story of what Christ has done in our lives. And so that's we're going to kind of wrap this whole series up tonight, kind of continuing that conversation. And I want to start out by telling you guys a story. So there was a time when I was young like you guys, and I was in a youth group. And our youth group, to this day, I hate skiing because our youth group went skiing, and I just never could figure it out. So when our youth group would go skiing, me and some of my other friends, because we hated skiing, we would go to like the sledding hill, and we would just sled like little kids. But so me and my friend AJ, not that AJ back there, but me and my friend AJ we decided we were going to sled together. And so we were on one of those really long sleds, you know what I'm talking about, like the plastic ones. And so we were riding one of those, and which is probably a little small for two guys to be on, but we were doing it anyway. And I don't know whose fault it was, I don't know whose feet it was, but one of our sets of feet dug into the snow. And when that happened, the whole sled picked up, and we both went forward. The sled came over the top of us. I was in front, so when I went forward, AJ came over me, and my legs came behind me. And so the very first thing that broke our fall was my face. And the snow wasn't really snow. It was more like ice mixed with snow. And so caught my face, my legs are touching the back of my head, and I'm just sliding across the ice. And I had this gigantic, I don't have a scar from it somehow, but I just had this gigantic strawberry all the way down my face. It's probably I've been blessed. That's probably one of the worst injuries I've ever had, just because I've never broken anything. So I don't believe in that stuff. I have Jesus Christ. But we love stories. We love to tell stories. We love movies. Some of us love books. I don't so much. But the thing about stories is we're always wondering what happens next. We love the twists and turns. We love the highs and lows. We love the happy endings. And for a lot of us, we love to tell stories. We just love to tell stories either about our lives or about other things, but we just love to tell stories. Sometimes we'd like to tell stories about good times we've had, but then other times our stories are about screw-ups and scars that we've had. And sometimes we've learned a thing or two from our stories. And for me, one of those things that was learned happened to me last year around this same time. And so the boys know what I'm about to say, but so last year at D Now, we were staying at my house, and I was inside with some of the boys, and some of the other boys were outside for whatever reason, in the road, throwing a frisbee, a disc golf disc that didn't belong to me, and they threw it into the storm drain. And so it wasn't mine. We were borrowing somebody's truck, and they just decided they could use it. And so I was like, well, we've got to get it. And actually, the way it happened was, for those of you that know Parker Timmons came into the house and said, hey, Justin, we need a crowbar. And I said, what do you guys need a crowbar for? And he said, well, we're trying to get the manhole cover open. And I was like, I've got to go outside because they're about to get arrested. And so I went outside, and I got a crowbar, and sure enough, they're trying to get the manhole cover off, and we get it off, and one of the things that I said to them as they were taking the manhole cover off is, because I don't know how many of you have ever lifted a manhole cover. They're pretty heavy. And so I said, guys, you need to make sure because I started helping them. I had the crowbar. I was pressing down on it to get it up, but you couldn't use the crowbar and pick it up. And so I said, 2 of you need to get on each side of it and lift it up. That way, one of you's not on it. You don't drop it and break your fingers or something. And so that's what they did. Everybody was afraid, even though it was just stormwater, everybody was afraid to go down in there. So we dangled Ethan Browning by his legs down into it. He got the Frisbee out. And so we were going to put the cover back on. I picked it up. I didn't pick it up. I couldn't. So I rolled it over to the hole. Remember, I told them to make sure there were 2 people on it at all times. So I rolled it over to the hole. And right as I get it over the hole, like the hole's a circle, the manhole cover's a circle, so they don't really lock into place. And so the hole's here, and I've got it standing up like this. Well, it slips and fell right on my foot. And for those of you on the front row, you might be able to see that scar and that scar. It was awful. Immediately my foot's swollen. It's bleeding the rest of the weekend for D now. Because I had all the students. I couldn't go to the hospital or anything. Somehow it didn't break. I didn't break anything. I didn't fracture anything. But I learned my lesson to listen to my own advice and always have 2 people on the manhole cover. So sometimes our stories, we learn things from our stories. Hopefully you guys have learned not to pick up a manhole cover by yourself. So tonight we're gonna talk about. I'm going to tell you guys a story about Paul. And so, for those of you who are familiar with Paul, he was one of the church's first missionaries, went on a lot of adventures, and in his time as a missionary, there were a lot of pretty terrible things that happened to him. But before we get into Paul's story, we're going to kind of talk about Paul's inspiration. And Paul's inspiration was Jesus. Paul kind of basically modeled his life after that of Jesus, in that, Jesus came, he sacrificed everything. He sacrificed everything that he had for us, for the people of this world. And Paul kind of did the same thing, in that before he came to know Christ, he was a leader. He was a higher up guy, and he gave all of that up as soon as Jesus came into his life. And so today we're kind of going to talk about our stories, but we're not necessarily going to talk about the fun stuff. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the stories that we hate to tell. Those stories that have left scars, maybe some physical scars like I have. Maybe for some of you, those are emotional scars that you can't see on the outside. And today, I want to tell you guys a little about that story of Jesus. So Jesus has died at this point where we pick up in the story, and he's risen from the dead, which is a happy ending, but it doesn't change the pain and the suffering that he went through. Because, Jesus didn't just die on the cross. He was beaten to the point of death. They beat him as much as they could without killing him, and then they put him on the cross. So he went through excruciating pain even before he died on the cross. And we're going to look at first what happened after he rose from the dead. So we're going to be in the book of Luke, chapter 24, starting in verse 36. And this is what it says. As they were talking about these things, Jesus himself stood among them and said to them, "Peace to you." So Jesus basically just jump scared them. They're in this room, bam, Jesus is there. So picture that. But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. So like we said a little bit before we read that passage, Jesus' story, it was both emotionally and physically painful. Even before Jesus died on the cross, the night before the night before he was crucified, he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he was praying to the point that he literally started sweating blood. So he's in this tremendous emotional pain, tremendous physical pain, and he had things happen to him that left scars. But he wasn't afraid to show those scars. He didn't try to hide his scars. He showed them freely. And sometimes even our most painful stories can have new life when we share them. And Jesus' scars, they were symbols of victory. He may have died on the cross, but those scars on his hands and his feet, those weren't scars of failure. Those were scars of victory. And a lot of times when I'm hurting, when I'm feeling down, when I'm upset, the story of Jesus is a reminder that I'm not the only one who has been hurt. And not only that, no matter the hurt that I've been through, no matter the pain that I've experienced, Jesus has been with me through it all. Like Jesus has been there through every bit of it. And this sort of attitude, it characterized the early church, which we talked about earlier in this series. They not only shared Jesus' story of pain and hurt, but they had their own stories of pain and hurt as well. The early Christian church was persecuted, heavily. Even worse than it's persecuted in China now. Like the early church, you didn't just go to jail if you were a Christian. A lot of times you got killed if you were a Christian. So the early church, they had their own stories of pain and hurt. And they understood that when we're honest about our own stories of pain and loss, we make it easier for others to be brave about owning and sharing their own stories. And this is actually the first step towards healing. So when we've gone through bad things in our lives, when bad things have happened to us, one of the first steps towards healing from that is actually sharing that with someone. And this early church, these early people in the church, they shared their stories because hearing other stories reminds us that we're not alone. Hearing other people's stories of pain and hurt reminds us that we're not the only ones who have experienced pain and hurt. And so going back to Paul, we're going to learn a little bit tonight that even his story of following Jesus wasn't easy. He was beaten, he was arrested, he was imprisoned, he got kicked out of cities for preaching too much. And where we're going to talk about tonight is he's actually on his way to this. He's on his way somewhere. I don't know exactly where he's on his way to, but he gets shipwrecked and he gets stranded on this island. And so we're going to pick up in Acts chapter 28, verse 1. And this is after he's been shipwrecked. This is after he's gotten to the island. So in Acts 28, chapter 1, it says this, or verse 1, it says this: after we were brought safely through, we then learned that the island was called Malta. The native people showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and welcomed us all, because it had begun to rain and was cold. When Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and put them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand, because apparently being shipwrecked and stranded on the island wasn't enough. So he's bitten by a snake. When the native people saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, "No doubt this man is a murderer. Though he has escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." He, however, shook off the creature into the fire and suffered no harm. They were waiting for him to swell up or suddenly fall down dead, but when they had waited a long time and saw no misfortune come to him, they changed their minds and said that he was a god. Now in the neighborhood of that place were lands belonging to the chief man of the island, named Publius, who received us and entertained us hospitably for 3 days. It happened that the father of Publius lay sick with fever and dysentery, and Paul visited him and prayed, and putting his hands on him, healed him. And when this had taken place, the rest of the people on the island who had diseases also came and were cured. They also honored us greatly, and when we were about to sail, they put on board whatever we needed. So I want you to imagine, I want you to kind of put yourself in Paul's shoes. So all that Paul's trying to do is he's just trying to share Jesus. He's a missionary going around the world just trying to share Jesus, yet these terrible things keep happening to you. Like I said, Paul was imprisoned. he was beaten. Like we see from this story, he was shipwrecked, bit by snakes. Like, these terrible things. All he's trying to do is share Jesus. But Paul's life was filled with terrible things. But one thing that we learn is that because of Paul's shipwreck, this terrible thing that happened, he was able to help a man who needed help. You got to realize that if Paul's ship doesn't wreck, he doesn't wind up on that island, and that man and all those people that he cured probably die because Paul's not there to heal them. And you see, Paul, he understood this. And this is, I really want you guys to hear this tonight. Paul understood that God is at work even in our most painful stories. God is at work even in our most painful circumstances. And when we share those stories, when we share those things that have happened to us, they're often a reminder to someone else who is hurting that they're not alone. So maybe for some of you, sometimes you'll feel like you're the only one dealing with the hurt or the pain or the experiences that you're dealing with. And sometimes that makes us feel ashamed. Like we think about the things that we've been through, we think about the things that have happened to us, and we feel like we're the only one that those things happen to. So we feel this sense of shame, and it kind of makes us want to keep them a secret. And I want to do something. I really want to challenge you guys tonight, and I'm not going to force you into anything, but what I want us to do right now is I want our guys to go over on this side of the room and circle up. You'll probably have to make an oval, and our girls, I want you to go on this side of the room and do the same thing. So go ahead and do that. Yeah, leaders, I want you guys to be a part of this too. So the best you can, I know there's a lot of people, but the best you can, try to make a circle. So, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to list a few experiences. We're not going into anything that's super personal, but I'm going to list a few experiences that may or may not affect you. And if it affects you, if you've experienced this in your own life, I want you to step forward, and then you'll step back. Does everybody understand? So I'm going to say something. If you've experienced that, or you understand that, I want you to step forward. And if you guys, right now, if we'll just, no talking, like I want this to be a serious moment. But again, if you've experienced what I'm about to say, we're going to start off with a few easy ones at first. So if you have a pet, step forward. All right, step back. If you have ever had an imaginary friend, step forward. All right, step back. Boys, my girls over here are doing awesome. If you play a sport, step forward. All right, step back. If you like to play video games, step forward. All right, step back. All right, now our next ones are going to get a little more difficult. And again, if you don't feel comfortable stepping forward, don't feel like you have to. If your parents are divorced, step forward. All right, step back. If you've ever experienced or been bullied before, step forward. All right, step back. If your family has ever been in need of financial help, step forward. All right, step back. And then this will be our last one. If you've ever lost someone close to you, step forward. Or you guys go ahead and step back. So what the purpose of this activity, the purpose of us doing this is I want you guys to realize that we've all been through difficult moments. We all have scars. We all have things in our life that have affected us, whether physically or emotionally. And there's so much more than we've even mentioned just now. I barely scratched the surface on some of the things that we could have mentioned. But my hope is that you'll leave today knowing that you're not alone. I hope that you'll leave today knowing that your story is worth sharing. And that when you share your story, that may help others know that they're not alone as well. Because what I hope you guys realize just now is there are other people whose parents aren't together anymore. There are other people who have been bullied. There are other people who don't have a ton of money all the time, who need help sometimes. And what I want you guys to realize is that for each and every one of you, just specifically to those of you whose parents are no longer together, there are probably people in your lives who need to hear your story about how you got through that. There are probably people in your lives who are going through that right now, who you could help them get through that because you've been through it. God has helped you through it. And that's the case for each and every one of the things that have happened in our lives. God, we're surrounded by people who need to hear your stories of hurt and pain because they're dealing with some of those very same things. And a lot of times it's difficult to reveal. It's difficult to talk about our scars, but just like Paul and Jesus, stories of pain and suffering, your scars are part of a much bigger story. Your scars are a part of something so much bigger. And guys, I love this. I want you guys to hear this. You don't get a great story or a great ending without difficulty. If you go through life easy breezy, like nothing ever happens, like if we're honest, like that's not interesting. Who wants to watch a movie where there's nothing bad that happened? Like there's no twists, there's no turns. Guys, your story is great because of the pain and suffering that you've endured. So I encourage you guys tonight to share your stories because your stories remind us that we're not alone. So we're going to do something else that's really weird. I want you guys to hold hands. And we're going to pray. And after I finish praying, you guys can go back to your seats and we'll close out with this final song that Brian's prepared for us. So let's pray. God, I thank you for, God, just what you've done for us, God. God, I thank you for the pain and suffering that you endured so that we could have life. God, without your story of hurt, God, we don't have grace. We don't have mercy. God, without your story of pain and suffering, we are condemned to hell. So God, I thank you for what you've done for us, God, by dying on the cross. And God, I pray for each and every person in this room, God, that you would move in our hearts. God, there's probably some of us in here who are dealing with pain and hurt, God, and we're so afraid to talk about it. God, we're so afraid to bring it up because we're worried about what other people are going to think about us, God. God, I pray that if there's somebody in this room tonight that's feeling that way, God, I pray that you would help them to recognize that, God, sharing that story, not only is it the first step to healing for them personally, but God, it could do so much in the life of someone else. So God, I just thank you. I love you for everything that you do. It's in your name I pray. Amen.